That was either the sound of a crowd cheering or getting run over by a lawnmower.
From my vantage point, it looks safely in the fairway.
Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at World-Class Leaderboard, a golf game that was pretty advanced for its time technically, though just like a lot of stuff made by Access Software, it hasn't aged very well. Though to be fair, this game is still surprisingly fun to play despite all this. Well, as far as computerized golf games are concerned. Now, ironically, all of my complaints about this game are centered on its technical aspects and its difficulty. This is one of the more difficult computerized golf games ever made, specifically because it doesn't hold your hand in the slightest and has incredibly picky hook and slice mechanics, which have been designed in such a way that a single pixel of inaccuracy in setting your hook and slice can result in drastic differences in the ball's direction. So even though it's a fun game, expect to be destroyed by it unless you're a computerized golfing master.
Looks like he hit the tree, Jim.
World-Class Leaderboard actually started life as a game simply called Leaderboard in 1986, released for various home computers other than the PC, then eventually evolved into World-Class Leaderboard in 1987, seeing multiple releases over the next couple of years on a plethora of computer formats, eventually landing on all three of Sega's video game devices of the time. I've read that US Gold had something to do with the publishing of certain media related to this game, but I wasn't able to figure out what specifically they were involved with. It's a 1 to 4 player golf game with support for Hercules, CGA, Tandy, and EGA graphics, though looks its best using either the Tandy or EGA 320x216 color video modes. Being from Access Software, it also doesn't support any sound devices other than the PC speaker, but later versions like the one I have uses their patented real sound technology to produce digitized sounds from the PC speaker. I should note though that anytime a sound effect plays, the game stalls until it's done playback, yet will buffer any key presses you make. Every once in a while, this will screw up your shot, I guarantee it. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and finding the PC version is extremely difficult, though finding versions for other platforms usually fares much better, especially if you want any of the Sega releases, since they're all really cheap and really easy to find. While I wasn't able to gauge a price on my own copy, I did manage to find a price of around $20 for an official CD that contains both the original game and all three of its extra course packs. So I imagine finding the discs themselves for the original DOS release would be similarly priced, and box copies would be much more expensive. Again though, that's just a guess. For almost every other platform the game came out on, the discs or cassettes themselves only run $3 to $6 and closer to $10 to $15 if you're getting the box and manuals too. As most of you probably know, computerized golf games, especially the early ones, tended to work using a system of hitting and releasing a button at key moments to determine how far a shot would go and if the shot would slice or hook, and World-Class Leaderboard is no exception to this formula. Once you get into the game, after choosing your player and course settings, it's simply a matter of choosing a club with the up and down arrow keys, aiming your shot with the left and right arrow keys, and swinging the club with the spacebar. In the bottom right corner of the screen, you have a special gauge that has two ranges on it for power and snap. When you press down the spacebar, the power gauge builds up. The longer you hold the spacebar down for before releasing, the more power you get. Though if you hold it down too long, you'll lose power. Then, once the gauge hits the middle again, it dives into the snap range. Pressing the spacebar when this gauge is perfectly centered will result in a straight shot. Pressing the spacebar again early will result in a hook to the left, and pressing it again late will result in a slice to the right. This leads us into one of the more insidious things about the difficulty of this game. You only have to be off by a single pixel on the snap gauge to end up with deviously large slices and hooks. If you're off by 2 pixels, your ball is probably going to end up nowhere near where you intended it to go. Essentially, you need exceedingly good timing to get even close to par on these courses. Actually, there's one thing that's very fun about this game is that nearly all of the courses are taken from real life. The original game includes 4 18-hole courses by default: Cypress Creek, the Drawl Country Club, St. Andrews, and a fictional course called The Gauntlet, made specifically for this game, featuring holes that are a bit more difficult than you'd expect to find on an actual golf course. There was also 3 famous courses expansions released for this game, the first 2 of which featured 3 real-life courses each and 1 fictional course, and the third expansion had 4 real-life courses and no fictional ones. This was actually one of the major selling points of the game when it was still new, was its attempt to accurately emulate real-life courses as best as the technology would allow. Once you get onto the green, the interface changes slightly. You now have a putting gauge as well as a marker beside your player indicating slope, height, and angle. Putting in this game is always straight, so it's just a matter of making the right shot with the right amount of power. The ticks on the gauge actually refer to increments of 8 feet each, starting at 0, given a perfectly level green, so you'll need to take the slope indicated into account when judging how much power to use. If you just tap the spacebar, you'll only get about a foot of distance at most, so be careful if the game shows you the distance in inches, but it's actually over 10 inches or so to the hole. And that's pretty much all you need to know to get into the game, but now let's talk about some of the specifics. Before we talk about the difficulty of this game, I want to draw your attention to the wind gauge on the side of the screen. Now, something that may occur to you in looking at this gauge is that it's showing you the wind direction just fine, but where's the wind velocity? Well, there isn't any. In fact, in most screenshots you look at for this game, chances are you won't ever see any wind velocity measured. Typically it's done by extending a bright red line from the center of the gauge straight upwards, with taller lines equaling greater velocity. The reason you rarely see this happen in any screenshots is because of your difficulty choices. The game offers 3 difficulty levels to choose from: Kids, Amateur, and Professional. On the Kids level, there's no wind and no hooks or slices. On Amateur level, there's simply no wind. On Professional level, all game elements are active, but one is also removed: the putting gauge. Well, okay, it's not exactly removed, but it stops doing what it's supposed to do. When putting on Professional level, you're only shown the first little bit of the gauge going up, and then have to mentally figure out how long you want to hold the spacebar down for before releasing, at which point a tick will show up to indicate how much power you actually put into your putt. While this may have seemed like a good idea to the developers, in real life, you can gauge the strength of your putt by how far and how fast you're moving the club. As gamers, we don't have this kind of tactile feedback, which is why we need gauges and indicators to tell us what's going on. Cutting out the putting gauge and forcing the player to rely on his mind removes one of the forms of feedback we need as players to adequately enjoy this aspect of the game. I suppose there might be a few people who can adapt to this, but given the fact I've never seen any other computerized golf game ever made do something like this, and considering the fact that I rarely ever see screenshots where there's any wind velocity, I'm willing to bet most people don't care to play the game that way and just stick it on amateur level like I have. Also, as I've already mentioned, the hooks and slices are way out of control, since a single pixel on the snap gauge can mean the difference between being on the left side of the fairway and being way behind the trees on the right side. Though, to be fair, the game does offer driving ranges and putting greens to practice your shots on, but this leads into something that I'm kinda surprised I need to talk about. I'm gonna make this simple. This game has one of the worst user interfaces ever made. Now, I know what you're all thinking. For a game that's fun and technically impressive, how could it have such a terrible user interface, especially when it just amounts to pressing specific keys? Well, that's exactly it. In order to get the game to do stuff, you need to press certain keys with no on-screen indication telling you that you can. To be fair, most of these are done from the screen that asks how many players are playing, but it really boggles my mind that they decided to skip having some kind of way to let the player know what they could be doing. For instance, from the player selection screen you're seeing right now, you have the ability to quit the game, change your course selection, use the course editor, change the ball colors, access the putting green, access the driving range, watch the pre-recorded demo, adjust the volume level of the sound effects, load a previously saved game, select a specific hole from a specific course to practice on, view the top 10 scores for the currently selected course, and finally, change the color intensity when running the game using CGA graphics. And yet, all this screen says is to choose the number of players from 1 to 4. I think I've made my point, but in case I didn't, the UI relies far too heavily on keyboard shortcuts, and not all of these are listed in the manual. Some are only listed in the accompanying documentation you can access prior to starting the game up. And in neither the pre-game documentation nor the manual is there a simple list of everything you can do from this screen. Which means if you want to do something specific but aren't sure how, you need to first remember where you read about it, then try and locate those details again to get the keyboard shortcut. Or I suppose you could just mash buttons and hope for the best, but that just drives my point home further. It doesn't stop there either. You also have the ability to make punch shots by pressing P before making your swing, which is supposed to let you get a shot under a tree and back onto the course, but it never really works that way. You also have the ability to completely abandon the game in progress in a heartbeat by pressing escape. Yeah, if you press the escape key, it's an instant quit without first confirming if you really want to or not, even though the player selection screen asks if you really want to quit the DOS or not. On more than one occasion, I've accidentally done this, and for a game where you're going to invest at least a half hour into each run, it's inexcusable. World Class Leaderboard is a fun game for people who aren't looking for a fair challenge. While it's worth a try at least once, even by people who are only mildly interested in PC golf games, the level of difficulty will absolutely punish most players, while others will simply be turned off by the stupid handicapping of the putting mechanics, and only a tiny number of people are going to be able to actually make solid progress on this game's professional level. However, it was definitely really impressive for its time from a technical standpoint, given its in-game commentary speech and the large number of real-life courses available, with the game providing 3 such courses without any expansions, and 13 in total if you did get them all, 16 if you want to count the fictional courses too. To that end, it serves as a very interesting piece of DOS gaming history, and it's definitely one to keep your eyes open for if you're a collector. Dosbox settings are also super simple. Just leave cycle set to auto and you're good to go. The game also has joystick support, but I don't recommend using it since it's far too easy to accidentally change your club selection when doing so, since you change clubs by moving the stick up or down. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week for episode 128, we're going to take a look at a first-person shooter with lots and lots of gold. Okay, that was way too obvious. You guys better send in your guesses quickly to adg@pixelships.com because when you tune in next Saturday, I'm pretty sure you'll all know what to expect.
Absolutely marvelous fun.
Just in case you guys are wondering why I didn't elaborate on the course editor, it doesn't actually let you edit the holes themselves. It just lets you make your own basic courses by mixing and matching holes and tree selections from the other courses. Really, it's nothing special.